Lovely, thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to Transport Committee meeting on this sunny day of Friday, 26th of May. Any apologies for absence? Now, this is one of those meetings where it's a bit of a crossover between last Transport Committee and next. We have a few observers in the audience who are going to be joining us. I think it's at the next meeting, is it? Is it the next meeting?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, obviously once we've been through the Combined Authority AGM. So welcome to observers who will be joining us, and this will be a good induction for you. Thank you very much for coming today. So apologies for absence, are they noted?
Yes, so I have apologies from Councillor Butt, from Councillor Hutchinson, Councillor Jones, Councillor Rosshaw, Councillor Scullion, Councillor Wilson and Amir Hussain.
Lovely, thank you very much. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? No. Obviously, if you think of any as we go through the agenda, please do immediately make yourself known. Yes.
I know I've always, say this at the beginning of the meeting. I do work for First Group, so
yes, but it's in your in your register of interest, isn't
it? But just for clarity, I thought
that's fine. Mention it. Thank you. Any exempt information? I don't think I've seen any today. Yeah. Minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on 10th of March 2023. Seems an age ago. Can I say any? It was. Yes, you're right. It was, wasn't it? It was. Absolutely. So, any comments or amendments you need to make to the minutes? No. In that case, I'll propose those as correct record. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And then first item on the agenda is rail strategy consultation, which is a big piece of work that has been ongoing for some time, and we're about to go for more consultation, I believe. Rachel, do you want to comment on this paper? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes. So the purpose of this report is to seek your approval to commence with public consultation on the emerging draft rail strategy over the coming summer. So just a quick recap, the role of the railway. We know the railway plays an important and varied role in West Yorkshire, and we also know that the rail network currently faces many challenges as well going forwards. And crucially, investment in new and existing rail infrastructure is going to be vital in achieving the ambitions of our economy, as well as achieving net carbon zero economy by 2038. So back in 2021, a draft rail vision was developed as part of the connectivity infrastructure plan, and that set out, the ambition for the way forward in the way the railway needs to go and how it needs to become fit for the future. It puts the rail network at the core of a fully integrated rail transport plan which is accessible to everybody. So since then, we've considered all the feedback from that. We've also carried out extensive and comprehensive engagement with members, district partners and a range of stakeholders. This has led to us developing a draft rail strategy, which you've had in the associated appendix to this agenda item. And as part of developing that strategy, we carried out 2 workshops in the last municipal year, or the current municipal year, I should say, back in May, and then November was the most recent one at the end of last year, so a few months ago now. Obviously, this will form a key document of the new Mayor's West Yorkshire Local Transport Plan that's currently in development. We had planned to carry out consultation of this draft rail strategy document alongside local transport plan consultation, but because of the delays in getting guidance on what our LTP should look like from government, we have come to the conclusion that we wanted to carry out the consultation now over the summer, and also to make sure we're sort of fitting in with other consultation that's planned as part of bus reform and then indeed LTP into next year. In doing so, obviously, we'll use the content of the strategy and the feedback, and it'll very much feed into the LTP to provide that context for development of Northern Powerhouse Rail and obviously the integrated rail plan studies as well. Will also be used as an opportunity to start to develop and deliver some of the improvements at stations that are needed going forwards. So the purpose of the rail strategy is around funding and around aligning policies to set the context for the future for achieving the region's economic activities. It'll provide a regional evidence base, and it will also provide a vision for rail for West Yorkshire up to 2050 going forwards that we can use. We're looking at how it will ultimately address urgent issues such as frequency, capacity and passenger experience, which is subject of another report as well at this committee this morning. There's 4 key priorities I set out in the report at 2.10. So the next steps under 2.11 is that we're looking to start the consultation next month in June. The form of the consultation will be primarily aimed at the government list of statutory consultees and district partners, obviously also the rail industry, and then other groups such as rail user groups who represent the interests of rail user communities. However, anybody will be able to have their say on the strategy. It'll be available on the Your Voice platform. It is a technical document, and from that will flow a pipeline of interventions and schemes, which we will obviously consult on separately going forwards as and when those interventions come forward. We're planning on having online webinar for anybody to be able to join, and that will be publicised across the region for people to join. If people and members of the public do want to give feedback on the ongoing sort of rail operation and you know any concerns, there will be signposting for these people, but it's not the focus of this consultation. So the recommendation under 10.1 Chair is that this committee approves and agrees to the consultation of the emerging draft rail strategy over the summer this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. First of all, can I say it's nice to see it all written down, isn't it? I think we've needed this piece of work for quite some time, and it really helps us in working with partners like Network Rail and government to say, look, it's on our to-do list. Please, can you support us in delivering some of these short-term aims, as well as obviously the long-term ambitions we've got around HS2 and NPR. If any questions, comments? I'm seeing Matthew and then Martin, Councillor McLaughlin and Councillor Bolt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. I enjoyed reading the report. It is nice to see it all written down, see an awful lot of work come together and finally start to look like an actual plan. Just a smaller question that was something that I noticed wasn't in the report. Obviously, when a lot of this big infrastructure happens and this investment happens and it's vitally needed, especially if we're going to tackle the climate crisis. I was just wondering if these projects are subject to biodiversity net neutral or net gain rules like a lot of other big developments and plans are, because obviously it's unavoidable that some things are going to get cut down and some greenery is going to be lost. And I was wondering if it was within the plan to make sure that that wasn't a net loss to the overall environment. And also, I'm glad to hear that representative groups of rail users will be consulted, and I wouldn't be forgiven by my ward residents if I didn't say would SMART, Slough and Marsden Action on Rail Transport, be included on that list. Thank you.
Certainly, to pick up your second point, if that's okay, yeah, I assume, I mean, obviously, as the report says, anybody will be able to look at the strategy and comment on it, and specifically, you know, rail user groups, if you know, they will be targeted. We've got a long list. I can double check, but I'm fairly sure if it's an established group, it will definitely be on the list as well. So thank you.
I pick up on the first point on the net biodiversity. I wouldn't claim it's my area of expertise, but what I do know is when we're working with the rail industry, they are looking at net biodiversity as part of their projects, and also within our appraisal processes. Obviously, we're working towards net zero carbon, which plays one part of that, but the biodiversity is a wider area, and that does come under our appraisal processes. So it is a consideration within what we're doing with our individual projects. I think the wider question is to ensure that as a strategy it all comes together. So those things will be directly within our control, and some things won't be. But I think we could paint a picture on that, and I think that's probably something we should seek to draw out through the consultation as well.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On the 2.11 next steps, again, I think we've raised it before about inclusivity. The officer mentioned it, it says in the report about webinars. In the report, we have who we're consulting and what we're consulting about, but I don't think we've got enough about how we're consulting. With inclusivity, we've got to remember that quite a lot of passenger users may not have access to IT and things like that. Can we actually have some real consultation in libraries such as Murfield Library and other places where we have big rail user groups and station friends of stations, so that those people who use the railways who don't have the IT can be included.
Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely take that back, Councillor Bolt. I mean, I think as it says in 2.13, and I understand what you're saying, with this being a technical document, I think the idea is that it would be made perhaps something that's focused more on the rail industry and specific rail user groups. I think, you know, it also says in that paragraph that, you know, interventions and schemes that come out of that strategy, which, you know, is something deliverable on the ground ultimately at the end of the day, they will be separate to their own individual separate consultation processes, which would be sort of more about general public consultation, particularly within that locality where that intervention was intended. However, having said that, I will feed that back. Thank you.
Lovely. Any more questions, comments? Councillor Firth?
Thank you very much, Matthew. I'd just like to thank our officers and the team that's responsible for pulling all this together, because it's a huge amount of work, and a lot of it is got to be visioning, because this is going to happen tomorrow. You're talking about a decade for lots of these projects, and even longer. So I think we're setting our stall out now, but let's get people involved as much as possible, as Martin says. We've also got our district committees, which is another avenue that we will be having two in the forthcoming year, Martin. I assure you of that. But he's right, he's quite right. But there's lots of opportunities to talk to the public, and I said thank you once again for this piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome it as well. I'm just going to comment on freight and because I think that's hugely important, of getting kind of goods transported on the roads, off our roads and onto trains. So I'm just wondering who will be the consultees in regards of freight. Thank you.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's a one thing that is easily forgotten by councillors who are residents of legal lesson, but actually from a business point of view, it's vital we sort that. And there is a mention in here, but there probably needs to be a little bit more focus on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, there is a mention, you're right. And I mean, we're also developing a separate freight strategy, which will be another daughter document of the local transport plan. That is in development at the moment. That will obviously look at all forms of freight transport. You know, obviously rail will be a big element of that, but there's obviously lots of other, and we're wanting to look at more innovative forms of transport for freight as well, going forwards through this strategy. But yeah, I'll certainly sort of feed that back, and you know, obviously that strategy will be subject to consultation as well, Councillor Hayden. So yeah, thank you.
And what's the timeline for the delivery of that strategy? Is it in line with this?
No, it's a little bit further behind, Councillor Hinchcliffe, but it will be developed over the coming year in terms of the timescales for development of the local transport plan, because along with a number of other strategies, you know, they will form the sort of key underpinning daughter strategies to the local development, to the local transport plan, and the first round of consultation for that is due early in the new year, so it will be produced over the rest of this calendar year.
I think it is certainly worth us bringing that the appropriate time to this committee, because it is something we're all quite interested in. Councillor Slam.
Yeah, Chair. Thank you. I think listening around the room, I just wanted to actually make sure we can have the best, you know, network, we can have the best trains, we can have whatever, you know, I mean, is needed. But if we don't have people travelling on them, then it's going to be a problem. And I think to give that confidence to people, we've got to actually make sure that we value their input. But like Martin says, and like, you know, Keith says, we've got to show that we're willing to go out there and consult those people, because that is very, very crucial at this moment of time. It's the confidence builder. If we're going to get people out of cars and onto public transport, whether it's buses, whether it's trains, we've got to have, you know what I mean, them having confidence that their views are actually seriously taken on board. Because not everybody has got, you know, access to internet. Not everybody is good with writing a document or a comment, you know, but when they're speaking, it's totally different. So we've got to give them every opportunity. We don't want to be criticised for not having that opportunity for people to actually give their input into it. So we've got to make sure of that.
Thank you, Councillor Kaushik.
Yeah, I do agree. And if you can just look at the last minutes, and we do pressure on the youngsters can easily access on the new technology, is we need to concentrate on the elderly, those who are not have got no idea how the IT is ongoing. So if we can do something for them as well. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of quick points on the document. I think it's incredibly well detailed and very well written, and I think officers should be commended on that. But I would say, obviously, the detail when you're doing a consultation can obviously hinder interaction with the public. So I'd ask that officers consider maybe a more concise and maybe more focused documentation when engaging with more general public and other stakeholders. And I think that would be very useful. Just touching on some of the implications for Bradford, and I think there's a lot to commend in there. I noticed obviously the private organisations like Keithworth Valley Railway mentioned and looking at extending services to Oxenhope. It'd be interesting to know what conversations have been had with organisations like that and how that's looking, and also how realistic and what sort of timescales the more general improvements in terms of signalling and increased capacity in trains are in the Bradford area. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. I'll definitely feed that back to the rail policy team. You know, like you say, there are some hooks in there. I know there's been a number of conversations on, you know, obviously all of the areas that are in the report, so I'll definitely feed that back. And yes, your point is well noted, and I've made a note of that around, you know, the sort of format of the information that goes out to that public consultation, so thank you.
We're pushing to find out what's in Network Rail's plan for capital projects in terms of signalling going forward. We don't have that at the moment. That's something we're pressing for. But you're right, that kind of, you know, dull kind of investment is actually stuff that really makes the railway work better. And it might not be a new line, but making people be able to go quicker from day to day, more reliable services is very much dependent on that capital infrastructure that Network Rail are able to fund. So we're still pressing to find out what's in that for the next period. Good. Yeah, Councillor Firth, would you come back in?
Just on that last remark you made, Chair, I hope that going forward, Network Rail recognise that the Penistone line really does want some attention, and the speeds, if you look at your papers, are at 29 mile an hour. It takes forever to get from Huddersfield to Sheffield, and that's going forward in this century. I hope it will be done.
Absolutely, there's no point having new rolling stock if it's on old track, is there really? Because it can't actually go any faster than 33 miles an hour in Bradford. So, right, okay. So with that, we've given that a good going over, I think. And there is a schedule, hopefully, for consultation. Obviously, all the comments about accessibility are very, you know, well meant, and sincerely need to see those happen. There's a recommendation, obviously, that we agree and let the emerging rail strategy be consulted on in June. Are we all happy with that? Please show. Lovely, thank you very much. That is carried. Lovely. So next is local transport forum arrangements, and we actually did refer to this in the previous item slightly, and that in some places it sort of fell between two stools of organisation last year between the combined authority and districts. I know it's their responsibility, theirs. This time I think we're clearer now, aren't we, that the actual combined authority is going to organise them, but obviously in consultation with districts and have districts there. So the paper is clear about how that works. Rachel, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so as you said, very much that's the purpose of this short report, is just to re-establish the arrangements for the local transport forums for the coming municipal year. I mean, you'll all be aware that around a year ago now, the role of transport engagement lead was created with one per council area, and in the appendix that goes with the report, there's a role profile of what the role would be of that transport engagement lead in each area. And the idea is that they lead on local transport matters in each council area, and sort of work alongside the respective transport related portfolio holder as well, help facilitate the sort of joint working between the combined authority and the council partners. Very importantly, in 2.2, transport engagement leads will also assist the deputy chairs and chair of the transport committee to maintain a good working knowledge of local transport matters and issues across West Yorkshire. So central to the role of the transport engagement leads is having open local transport forums in their respective areas. And these are obviously a public session, provide the opportunity for updates, in-person engagement, and an opportunity for the public and locals to raise specific transport-related matters. The aim is for 2 per municipal year, but there's no expectation that obviously that's the only forum that would be used to discuss combined authority transport agenda. There's also lots of other forums and ways in doing that as well. Important to note out that they're not formally constituted, and apart from being sort of led by the Transport Engagement Lead, no formal membership, but Transport Committee deputy chairs will be invited alongside the relevant transport related portfolio holder, local members, and also the Transport and Infrastructure Scrutiny Committee to each of those meetings. As Councillor Hinchcliffe said, you know, it didn't work as well as we'd hoped in the sort of current municipal year, and I think that was for a variety of reasons around ownership. And so what we want to do is, by bringing this paper, is establish those more definite arrangements for this coming year, and that's set out in the bullet points in 2.6. And I think the next step really is under bullet point 1, where it says, you know, each transport engagement lead will be allocated a senior transport officer at the combined authority. I think what the next step there is, once the transport engagement leads have been confirmed for each area, if they could inform myself and Dave Haskins, we will look at then sort of taking it forward in terms of allocating a senior transport officer from the combined authority to each of those, with a view to then taking it forward with officers from the respective local council as well. Looking to hold 2, as I say, toward one suggested one between September and November, and then another early into 2024. And a combined authority officer will summarise the key points at each of these sort of committee meetings going forward. There won't be sort of formal minute taking provided, for example, by the Combined Authorities Governance Services team. There isn't a set agenda. It's obviously up to the Transport Engagement Lead to lead on what they want to cover, but there is a suggested format for what meetings might look like. But obviously that's subject to if there's a particular topic or something that needs to be discussed. So the recommendation in section 10, in 10.1, is that the arrangements for the local transport forums for 23-24 are approved as set out in this short report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we just need to get on with it, don't we, really, I would suggest. Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, a couple of comments were made there, and it's referred to in the 2.6 bullet point 2, where it says 2 meetings. I refer colleagues to Appendix 1 and something that we discussed a while ago, which are the key duties and responsibilities. Bullet point 3 is to a minimum of 2. And I think we should maintain that, the flexibility, if issues arise, to have more. It's been quite, where it says 2 local transports, etc. I'd like to see a minimum in there to maintain, as it says in Appendix 1, that if the need arises, like we had in Murfield and Northkirk Leeds with issues with buses, that we could have had more meetings if we wanted. The suggested agenda, we're not the Passenger Transport Authority anymore, so again, item 4 on the suggested agenda talks about bus and rail operator update. I'd like to see us also including active travel, where the combined authority is a key partner. Active and integrated transport, and it's been mentioned to it before about climate emergency, is essential if we're going to be moving towards this. And we are funding a lot of these schemes, and at that local consultation level we need to hear from the user groups about how the delivery is actually taking place, because there may not be any other mechanisms in the local authorities. Not all local authorities have got elected member cycling champions like we have with Taj in Bradford, so yeah, we need to maintain that dialogue back to us, so integrated and active travel should feature on part of our agendas.
I mean, it's a good point about active travel. Obviously, it's a big part of our agenda these days. What I don't want though is for buses to be sidelined in those meetings, because obviously most people are there to hear about the bus service and want their bus service working better. So, I mean, obviously, Councillor Carlisle's area. I'm happy for it to be a minimum, but I think anything over that needs to be in conjunction with the portfolio holder, because obviously what we could get, and I'm not suggesting anybody here would do that, but somebody wanting one once a week, for example, and we can't have that. So portfolio holders are in charge of resources. I think probably anything over 2 needs to be agreed with the portfolio holder for the area. Councillor Cowell and Councillor Salam.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to clarify the reason it mentioned bus and rail operator update there is because at these meetings it's a really valuable place for the operators to come and put forward what they're doing and answer questions on performance in theirs. In terms of active travel, obviously that's something the combined authority or the council officers would be the operator of, shall we say, in most cases. But that's what the really valuable bit is there, because we get representatives from all the bus operators that operate in that area and all the rail operators, and members of the public can come and have those conversations, which is really valuable. So I think that's why that's just on that 2 point, and that's one of the most important bits of that meeting actually, because it's then you can get into more specifics than we can here around district level engagement with operators and what is happening in your areas, which is really valuable.
Councillor Cowell, what's your view about putting active travel in there as well?
It has always been discussed, and in fact the chairs have had different topics. I know there have been some meetings that were entirely focused on active travel, and that be the main thing. But active travel has always been something that combined authority officers have brought in their transport update. One thing that the engagement, that changing it to that forum level was supposed to do was provide a better connection with officers from the separate districts, because there was always a bit of a disconnect before, because obviously we see the projects in their review stage as they're going through, but the detail on the ground is often with district officers who weren't always expected to be at those meetings. But this puts that expectation that there will be officers from the councils to discuss the specific project. So when somebody says what is happening on this particular cycle lane, rather than the detail that comes from the combined authority might just be, well, it's past business case stage, whatever it may be, but the officers from the district will be able to go into that. So yeah, all methods of transport have always been included in those. It's just that on that specific, that's for bus and rail operators to come and essentially put their case to and answer questions from residents. Thank you, Councillor Cowell. Councillor
I mean, just carrying on from there, just to assure the people, I mean, in Bradford, I mean, we've always had active travel on the agenda, and I've made sure that the bespoke meetings that we have, the officer that attends that meeting always attends the district consultation committee, is what used to be called now forum. The only question that I need to be sure about is in 2.3 it says that the local transport forums will be open public sessions, and is that just an item on the agenda that I could actually open up the meeting just in, what I used to do is open up the meeting and say, right, this is good, the next 10 minutes is going to be open public session. Anybody's got anything to say, and then we follow the agenda. But if we're just going to have this as an open public session, then we're going to have a problem because of following the agenda, because some of the, we could have anybody and everybody because we've got to accommodate. So before we used to have it in a committee room because that's where we had the membership. Now we will have to have it in a bigger room because anybody can turn up to these meetings and we can't debar anybody. So that's something that's going to be in the small detail that we need to actually make sure that when we are arranging these meetings, they are in a place that which can accommodate people that are going to turn up, because we don't want to turn people away saying, sorry, this room only accommodates 20 people and we can't have anything more than 20.
Okay, Councillor Cowell.
Yeah, I was going to come back a bit because I think a lot of this was taking it from what it was, which when we had that fixed membership, it's fair to say that wasn't a very representative membership, was it, of our district? And that was the real point we wanted to move away from. Certainly in the discussions I've been involved in around the meetings that were organised this year, it was around the engagement leads in that, suggesting organisations, user groups, anyone they knew that should be specifically invited, suggesting who should be round the table, where it be, so to speak, so that they could ask those questions, but also to have members of the public able to come in as they so wish. That does mean more complicated to find those rooms and such, but I think it's really valuable when operators are giving their update on what they're doing and when we're giving our update, that it is open to the public to view. We will just have to look at each room and an area separate for that. I don't think, to be honest, the issue was never before that we had too many people there. It was probably that not enough people knew about it. So hopefully, if we're getting to the point where we've got too many people to fit in the room, I'll be very happy that we've met the success. That at least it's getting that real engagement. So hopefully we won't get to that point, but we'll see where we get to.
Lovely. Any more questions, comments on this? So obviously they need to happen. I think I would keep it at 2 meetings, but then just say, if we add in the policy, if there is a need to do more meetings, those can be arranged in conjunction with the portfolio holder and the bus engagement lead. But obviously subject to resource and venue, etc. It's we live in times where we're restrained on resource, I'm afraid, Councillor Bolton. We have to respect that in terms of getting things done. Right, okay, with that then, are we happy with the recommendations? Yeah. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. Right. So next item on the agenda is transport policy update. And between meetings, lots of things happen, don't they really? And therefore, there's quite a lot in here, actually, in the subsequent papers as well. So, Rachel, would you like to start this paper?
I would, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is a report that comes periodically to yourselves at these committee meetings to give you an update on relevant transport policy developments that are obviously not covered elsewhere on the agenda. Set out in section 2, there's updates on a few different areas. So there's some updates regarding transport for the north. The board last met in March, just before the pre-election period. As it's set out in 2.1, there was a number of substantive items covered at that agenda, at that meeting. The one I wanted to just draw out in particular was the strategic transport plan, where there was a decision and it was confirmed that members of the board were happy for that plan to go out to public consultation in its draft format beyond the elections. And in actual fact, the draft just went public yesterday. It was a few days late and they'd originally planned to publish it on the 22nd. I think they're hoping to do the consultation over the summer and have a final version in place by the end of the year. They have got a big consultation engagement plan in place. There's going to be virtual sessions. They're going to come to talk to some of the officer groups, and they are holding in the Queen's Hotel on the 5th of July. They are holding a session for people to turn up to listen to what the plan's about and a chance to have their say and give their feedback on that. So obviously that's not in these papers because that's been announced since these papers were written. There was also a discussion about Northern Powerhouse Rail, and members called for a more local engagement on the NPR project going forward. The Rail North Committee also met back in February, and you can see there in 2.3 the agenda items that were covered. Discussions around, in particular, the sort of ongoing frustrations around TransPennine Express, and that's subject to an agenda item later in this meeting. They also discussed Manchester Task Force, East Coast Main Line, in particular looking to address Leeds to Sheffield connectivity, and then the strategic rail report, for the whole of the north, which is help deliver the ambitions set out in the strategic transport plan, and it will be consulted on later in the year. And there's another meeting coming up actually with Rail North Committee on the 7th of June, so we're awaiting the papers so we can prepare for that. In terms of electric vehicle infrastructure, so following the UK EV infrastructure strategy being published just a little over a year ago, government announced a local electric vehicle infrastructure fund, or levy, beyond that, which is a £450 million fund to accelerate commercialisation of local close-to-home charging. And I think, it's important to point that this fund levy is targeted at residential areas without access to off-street parking. So I set out in 2.7 and 2.8. We've had a couple of we've had a funding award for West Yorkshire back in February, as set out there. And then following that, the following month, we then got an additional allocation, which is actually subject to government approval of a suitable proposal being submitted. So altogether at the moment, we're looking at potentially capital funding of over £17 million between capital and then associated capability funds, which is around increasing capacity and capability at the local level to be able to plan and deliver EV infrastructure going forward. It's important to note that obviously, as well as this capital, this sort of public money, the project will be required to lever in private sector investment as well. So, you know, we're going to be looking at a total value, I'd expect in excess of 20 million. That's yet to be sort of identified and confirmed as yet. So there's been work underway to develop a West Yorkshire EV charge point strategy, and combined authority officers have been working very closely with district partners in order to do that. And the proposal for our levy fund will be developed based on the emerging strategic principles set out in that draft strategy and as set out in 2.10 of the report. We will be submitting a expression of interest today. This afternoon is the deadline for that. And the form of that expression of interest is that for the capital funding, we are required to provide a high-level approach to how we intend to use that capital money. And what we will need to do beyond the expression of interest submission is over the summer we need to work, as I say, on site allocation, looking at where we're going to invest the money, and we'll obviously need to bring something back to yourselves later in the year when we've done that piece of work for approval. But it's expected we'll need to submit a sort of full business case for that capital money towards the end of the year in November. In terms of the capability funding, in the expression of interest today, we have been asked to set out what we want to use that funding for in terms of resource across the partnership. So there's been a lot of work done with officers to get to that stage, and we've got a submission that will be going in, and we should hear if that is approved by government in the next month or two. So then, the final thing written in the report is just a quick update on the Public Particulate Information Improvement Project, or PIP as it's commonly become referred to as. So West Yorkshire, DEFRA announced that West Yorkshire's air quality scheme proposal was one of 44 projects to be awarded air quality grants over the next couple of years. And the whole point of this, the whole purpose, is to improve the understanding and awareness of particulate matter in West Yorkshire. So there's been a lot of work done with an engagement with the West Yorkshire Low Emission Strategy Delivery Group, which includes air quality representatives from the partner councils and public health professionals, and we're also engaging with some of the university establishments as well on this. The project primarily will be looking at 4 packages around enhancing the particulate matter monitoring network, establishing a particulate dashboard and a regional air quality public information page, and also some research projects that are going to be undertaken by the university partners in the partnership as well. The real aim is to improve the knowledge and understanding of particulate matter, and sort of looking at where improving that knowledge gap surrounding the sort of regional particulate matter data, and it's hoped that it'll give us better understanding of which sources have the greatest impacts on our communities and really help in the development of a new air quality strategy for West Yorkshire. I was also going to mention, Chair, if it's okay at this point, so that obviously not in the papers in front of us, but I had a verbal update on Active Travel Fund 4, if that's okay as well at this point. So we had intended to have a written update in this report for you this morning, but unfortunately we weren't able to include it because the embargo had not been lifted. So you may recall back in February there was a paper brought to this committee about the Active Travel Fund 4 submission, and we made that submission at a West Yorkshire level back in February this year. We were actually notified of the outcome towards the end of March, but it was embargoed until after the pre-election period, and the elections had taken place, and so that was lifted on the 19th, that embargo. So the feedback is, you know, in terms of the bid from West Yorkshire, the good news is that we received one of the highest allocations nationally in the country. We were successful in being given around 17.5 million towards schemes that look at delivering new cycleway, walkways and improvements to towpaths as well. The bid was assessed by Active Travel England, and obviously this leads on from previous rounds of Active Travel funding where we've been successful previously in previous years. So this was the fourth bid that we've made. Our bid was assessed using LTN 120 compliance around design standards, and obviously looked at value for money as well, and in particular looking at safe routes and options for women and girls in particular. There was also an award made based on a change request for a scheme in Leeds, which was actually a scheme that was awarded Active Travel funding through the previous round of Active Travel funding. So there was an additional almost 5.7 million provided for that scheme too as part of this announcement, bringing the total scheme announcement to just over 21 million. I should point out alongside that as well that we were also received £2.53 million back in January to support the delivery of these capital schemes across West Yorkshire through a capability and ambition fund, which provides that important revenue and support for scheme developments and obviously officer training to support scheme delivery and development going forwards. So the recommendation set out in section 10 of the report is that the committee notes the updates provided in this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. There's quite a lot in there. So first of all, around the Transpandan Express, if we can leave any discussion on that until the item, I think it's item 9, isn't it, that we're going to, and the passenger experience update, we'll talk about that there. So if we can suspend comments on that until then. Obviously, you mentioned Active Travel England there, which has been a particular frustration for us in Bradford. And when I saw that announcement, I immediately asked for a meeting with Chief Executive of Active Travel England, who have now had that meeting with, just to point out that they actually don't know the region as well as they should do. We all get together as Transport Committee members to decide what priorities should be, informed by our district officers. We put those in, and actually they decided that they knew better than us. And for me, as somebody who's a real champion of devolution, I find that particularly frustrating, because actually what should happen to this money is it's devolved to the region, and then we decide what the priorities are. So I've made my views very, very clear to Active Travel England, and I do believe they're going to visit us in the near future so they can understand a little bit more about the region and about what we need to make active travel work for everyone and be inclusive here. So any comments or questions? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Page 133, 28, it mentions £14,326,000 of capital funding to deliver EV charge points. Can we be told approximately how many points that will actually deliver? There's lots of talk here about £1.5 million for pilot funding and 236,000 for capability funding. But how many charge points will that deliver? And secondly, underneath that item, there's an item of £1 million for additional capability funding. And I wonder if the officer could just explain to me what that means, please.
Okay, Rachel.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for that. So the first point about how much we're looking to deliver for the capital funding, I mean, at this point we need to undertake the more detailed work that we haven't been required to do as yet, but we're expecting to deliver at least 500 and hopefully between 500 and 1,000 charge points within that sort of capital envelope. Probably important to point out we are looking at focusing, as it says in the report at 2.6, focusing at residential areas without access to off-street parking. We're also predominantly looking at slow or lower speed charge points, because the anticipation is that a lot of vehicles will be charged overnight, and we've delivered a rapid charging programme through a previous pilot of funding that we received. This is around sort of slower speed charging overnight, targeted at residential properties without off-street parking. So between 500 and 1,000 is what we're aiming for there, subject to the sort of further work we need to do. In terms of the capability funding, so in 2.7, the 237 almost £1,000, that is supporting 2 full-time project managers, which will be employed within the combined authority to work with partners, the district partners, to deliver some of this capital funding that's coming forward. The 1 million, just over 1 million additional capability funding that we've been given has led to us working closely in partnership through the EV task group to set out the resources, because obviously, you know, 1.5 million of capital funding compared to over 14 million, that's quite a different ask in terms of resources needed to deliver quantums of money like that. So the additional money will be used to support additional posts subject to confirmation by government, which there's been a lot of work done to identify what those extra posts would need to be within our partner councils. That will be going into the submission to government today, and hopefully we shall find out in the next month or two if that is supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. I mean, there's quite a lot for us to learn, isn't there, on EV charging points, etc. And we can all think of areas in our own districts where there's, you know, densely populated areas where you're going to be able to put the facility to do this. And I think we could probably do the separate session on it at some point, perhaps as a workshop. I don't know which is. I'm just looking at Councillor Koshik and Councillor Carlow. Is it you? Decarbonisation. Oh, excellent. So Councillor Carlow will organise that. Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, just on the issue of EV charging, some of the schemes that this authority has already been rolling out, I think is it ENGIE in partnership with, though you get 2 bays, sometimes in car parks that are not probably the most prominent areas, one of those bays is then marked up, says taxis only, when there's no taxi rank or anything in the vicinity. The other problem with that scheme, and I hope we can learn going forward, is that there's no TRO in place. Unlike some of the other electric charging schemes that local authorities have rolled out, where it's illegal to park in if you're not in an electric vehicle and you get a ticket, the ENGIE scheme isn't covered by them, so non-electric vehicles can park in and therefore negate the idea. And I'm told by civilian enforcement officers that a lot of these ENGIE type ones, because they come with a charging lead on them, you're lucky if the charging lead stays very long, because obviously the scrap value of that means that sometimes, sadly, thieves in society, whereas the other type schemes, the vehicle user has their own lead and plugs in. So I hope we can look at that going forward to make them more accessible to all users. You know, it seems strange to restrict 50% of the bays when you hit, for taxis when there's nothing in that area. And I agree fully with your idea that devolution should be passed down to the lowest level. And I look forward to more money being sent to Murfield so we can decide as local councils how to spend it. And as if by magic, talking about the AT and interaction, there is the annual all-party parliamentary cycle ride in Westminster, where government ministers, ATE and practitioners have a bike ride. They have then a small conference, usually in the Dutch Embassy and things. I'm going down to it, and I would hope that local authorities or this authority would also make sure that others can go down, and that way you can get to meet those people in a less formal situation.
That is a bit of a red flag to bull, really, right, Councillor Bolt, because you're asking me to go to London to talk about money that should be spent in West Yorkshire. And I just, you know, those people who are making decisions about West Yorkshire need to understand the terrain we're working with in West Yorkshire. Shouldn't need to go to Westminster to have that conversation. So I do find that a bit of a frustrating argument. Councillor Buckley?
Yeah, just going back to this 500 to 1,000 charging points. Why are we so vague on this? We must have a more definite target, surely. And isn't there a way of saying we need 948 or something like that. Is there more precision needed?
Doesn't it depend on what we use, whether it's a car park or a charging point on a street or something?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think at this stage, at this early stage, we don't know because, well, we don't know how much private sector funding we're going to be able to lever in through this agreement. And obviously, the more we can lever in, the more charge points we're going to be able to deliver. And at the point in time now, in terms of the expression of interest, we have not done that work that you're, I think, describing. That was what we need to do over the summer in terms of identifying what the solutions are, where we're going to be able to deliver, and therefore, you know, how many we're going to be able to cover for the money that we're going to have available. So I think that's all the work that needs to be done over the summer with a view to putting in a detailed application towards the end of the year. So yeah, we've sort of said between 500 and 1,000, but also this is an emerging area for us as well, you know, and so it's an area that we need to develop now over the coming months going forwards.
Lovely, thank you. I feel a workshop coming on, Councillor Carlow.
Yeah, I think that'd be really useful, and we'll go, because I think what's interesting about this one is it's tackling the problem that hasn't been tackled really yet, of those people who have electric cars but live in a terrace street with no opportunity of doing, and that's why some of the amounts are a bit vague in what this funding will be, because until we choose what area, you know, we may say this is going to the most rural village in West Yorkshire, and the cost per charge point will then be massively increased, because obviously you've got to provide the connection to the charge points as well, which is one of the most expensive bits. So I think it'll be all around where we pick to spend that money, how many you're able to get. But I think what's really positive about this is it is trying to solve that problem that we probably all get in our inbox of many times of, well, how can I switch to an electric car when there's nowhere really for me to charge it at home? And it's very easy if you've got a drive to have one installed yourself, and most of that's done by private funds. But obviously when it's outside your house on public highway, then that's something that we have to look at and help with. So I think that's the problem, that it will be a completely different cost if you're putting one in the middle of Leeds city centre, where there's so much infrastructure already, to if you're putting one in a rural area outside of Murfield, for instance. And that's what we need to look at in this, and where should we learn the most and tackle that. And hopefully then when we learn from this project, we'll be able to get more funding coming in and keep delivering, rolling them across.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce the frustration around Active Travel England, that we were told effectively we were a trusted partner as an authority, and the decision seems to counter that completely.
Thank you. It is very frustrating indeed, and I have obviously expressed my frustration to Active Travel England, and hopefully with if they visit the region, they'll understand better what we're tackling here. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. An EV, I just can't get my head around. You've got a long row of terrace houses, and we're going to put some charging points, and the door is facing under the pavement, and I can't see anybody having £120,000 new electric car parked at a terrace house where we know charging, because I was looking at the cost of the top of the range only the other day, in the Daily Mirror, by the way. £120,000. I'd love an electric car, but I haven't got £120,000, so putting one of those near my house is a bit of a waste of time. On the active travel,
that should hit
you need a lot more whip rounds than that, £20 note. On the active travel, although Susan, the Chair, knows my views on what happened on the last occasion, what I do welcome is that the £2.5 million that the smaller authorities, because obviously the big authorities don't need it, will go to us and Wakefield and Calderwood to work up some schemes that will fit the criteria for active. Thank you, Chair.
So I think you'll find on this committee we're all one West Yorkshire. Yes. Really, Councillor Firth. So
not all one West Yorkshire according to active travel, and I know the percentage of active travel monies that came to Leeds, 58% of the pot, and I wish absolutely scandalous, but that's
So I think Leeds would also support us in making sure that more investment comes to all parts of West Yorkshire. It's like, obviously, none of us can be successful without all of us being successful in terms of authorities. Anyway, Councillor Firth, thank you very much. So I think that I'll bring Councillor Hayden in for right of response. However, I do think, you know, the electric vehicle charging point has come up before. We've all got the issues in our own wards about how important it is. We've all got residents writing to us saying, how do I trailer a lead across the pavement? Because actually it's cheaper electricity, I understand, from home than it is in one of these car park things as well. So it's something about inclusivity as well. We need to all understand that, I think, from a ward councillor point of view, as well as strategic transport leads. So obviously we're tasking Councillor Carl with organising that workshop. We're going to have a more detailed discussion on some of those elements. But before we close this item, I will bring in Councillor Hayden just to speak.
Thank you. On the EV charging, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's some very dangerous activity going on in terms of cables, either coming from windows above or out of doors and across the pavements and things like that. So we do need to get it as quickly as possible. I mean, it'll have to be in kind of off-street, kind of near people's houses. You can get electric cars much less than £120,000. Otherwise, my brothers are both hiding money that I didn't know they had. But on the active travel, it is. But can I have a plea that we want a levelling up? So we all get, you know, the money we deserve from government, rather than Leeds being criticised for having more than others. I don't want Leeds to have more than others. I want us all to have our fair share in West Yorkshire, and we are one West Yorkshire.
Hear, hear. And I'm afraid when there's scarce resources, this is what the government make us do, isn't it? Fight with each other for scarce resources. And as you rightly say, we all need the right investment to make our economies and our society work better. So with that then, a recommendation is we note the update, which is quite useful, thank you very much, and move on now to bus service improvement plan update. And there's quite a lot in here as well. So this is going to be Dave, I think, to start with.
It is. I'm giving Rachel a break after having the last three items as well. There is quite a lot in this report. I'll talk it through. It probably comes in about three parts, really, I suppose. Firstly, there's the update on the state of the local bus network and delivery of the BSIP, as it's known as, network improvements, and the Mayor's Fares. Also be a verbal update on the DFT funding announcement that you'll be aware of that was made last week as the papers were going to press. Hence, we were unable to get the information into the papers with sufficient intelligence behind them, I think it's fair to say. And also want to briefly reference the decision that was made yesterday around bus reform as well, which is relevant. It's relevant in the context of the bus industry generally, I think, but relevant in the context of what we're doing as an authority and with our partners. I'll point out there's no approvals directly as a result of this paper itself, but there will be some financial approvals being sought as part of item 11, which I'll cover in a broader sense here, and then we'll see if that's sufficient detail when we get to item 11, which I can cover again, and happy to return to that because we will need to ratify those through the approvals process. Firstly, by way of background, I'm sure you're aware, following COVID, recovery of the bus market is up to about 85% at the moment. It seems to be levelling off or have levelled off recently, but that remains to be seen. And government BSIP is really around trying to push this forward further again and to sort of help stabilise the bus market and bring a return to the patronage that was lost over that time, but also grow patronage over time as well. So we were awarded £70 million of BSIP in revenue funding over 3 years. It was a lot less than what we asked for, but it's a lot more than a lot of other authorities have got. So in that context, it's a positive. And the remit of this, really, of what we're doing is prioritising cheaper fares and increased service frequencies and new routes. Obviously, as I've said, all this against the backdrop of low patronage and service cuts. Three elements to BSIP. This report focused on the first two of them. There's the Mayor's Fares, which is about £36 million. The new services, I'll just call them in the broad sense, of £31 million, which is a combination of new routes or enhanced routes, but what we call enhanced bus services, previously known as Superbus, which is still a little area of confusion in the naming, but we'll get there in the end. And the other area is a small amount of money, a couple of million on bus priority and safety, a couple of million there, yeah. Firstly, on Mayor's Fares, very, very briefly on Mayor's Fares, before I get on to the announcement from last week. As you're aware, that's been capped at £2 single and £4.50 for what we call an M-card day saver. And the analysis we've got to date shows about half a million journeys, a week being made under this initiative, and it's saved about 3.6 million to the public, with the passenger saving of about sort of 20 pence, or is it 20% on fares as an average of that as well. And we are looking at doing more analysis in train to understand the impacts in more detail. It's fair to say it's a very complex area because it's been looked at nationally against this backdrop of recovering patronage. So clever people and me will need to be involved in that process to disentangle what the growth is as a result of people coming back, as opposed to people using that where it's been of real benefit, particularly during the cost of living crisis as well. So moving on to the work around what we're doing as part of BSIP in terms of the networks, we're currently working through what's called Tranche 1, which is about £3 million of investment to get a short list of around 10 services in West Yorkshire. And we've been working closely with the district partners, working with our own officers, been working with the district partners, but also with bus operators, to find a way of prioritising down from a list of about 450 routes originally down to this initial 10. But within that, there are lots of other routes which can form parts of Tranche 2 and Tranche 3, which are £9 million with 25 services and 6 million with 15 services respectively. We're acutely aware of the fact that service cuts have taken place already in some cases, and Wakefield indeed have through Arriva have suffered in that respect. But also I think it's fair to say wider, we're also aware of, and I'll come on to it, around potential future cuts being highlighted through operators which may be coming into play or being talked about coming into play before too long. So some key challenges there around how we work through to get to that shortlist, which I will come back to. On the enhanced bus services, or a superbus, as I said, 3 routes are initially proposed, the intention being for the Combined Authority through BSIP to fund for the first 3 years in a kind of reducing way, and then for the operators to take the commercial risk in years 4 and 5, with the aim to make them fully sustainable services. And those 3 services are, there's one in the Keighley area, then there's Shipley to Leeds service, and there's Halifax to Huddersfield service. And obviously within that, there were discussions with Arriva to try and establish services in that area, which were not fruitful in respect of, particularly with Tranche 1, but we'll probably go back for another bite of the cherry on that one. There is a further £5.7 million available in the pot once that initial £4.25 million has been allocated to those routes. So we will need to look at how we allocate that, whether it is on more superbus routes or whether it is around supporting services as well. So some key decisions to be made over time. And I think in respect to that, I'll touch next on the bus reform announcement, then I'll come on to the government announcement last week. So in terms of bus reform, at the Combined Authority meeting yesterday, committee members approved the progression of what's called the assessment for audit. And it's a bit complicated, but it's a statutory requirement set out under the Transport Act 2000 and linked to the Bus Services Act 2017. So that assessment concludes that franchising is the preferred option for the Combined Authority to progress with, subject to the audit which will take place over the summer and subject to the outcome of the statutory consultation which will flow from that in the autumn as well. And this will inform a report and recommendation to the Mayor coming forward in early spring next year. And it's also proposed as part of that to continue engaging with local bus operators to understand in more detail what can be achieved under what's called the Enhanced Partnership or Enhanced Partnership Plus option, which could be considered, which will be considered, as any part of a mayoral decision going forward. Turning to the issue of the announcement last week, I'm hoping, I believe it happened, a briefing note has gone out to Transport Committee members which sets out in broad terms what that announcement actually said. Again, it talked about how government had been providing support to supplement the revenue lost to the bus system as a result of reduced patronage during the pandemic. And government also asked local government to continue to pay bus operators at pre-pandemic rates. So this was subject last year to a short time extension, and that funding was due to expire at the end of June this year. And continued uncertainty has proved to be quite unhelpful to local transport authorities and bus operators, as I'm sure you're all aware. And the government introduced the £2 national fare cap in January for 3 months and then extended it to June. So as part of the announcement, they've agreed to provide up to 200 million to continue capping the single bus fares at £2 outside London. Obviously, the Mayor's Fares initiative was introduced ahead of that national scheme and is funded through the Bus Service Improvement Plan. So the government announcement on fares does not therefore apply to us in West Yorkshire, where separate decisions can be made on fares, timescale and cost. In terms of the wider picture, 160 million has been provided to local transport authorities to improve fare services and infrastructure, with 140 million to go direct to bus operators to help spread and protect essential services. And that's spread over this financial year and next financial year. So from our perspective in West Yorkshire, as I've said already, they were poised to reduce services commensurate with loss of funding they were expecting. So that while they've welcomed the certainty that funding comes from government, but they're revising it still less than they were receiving. And to be honest, we're not 100% clear on what they were receiving, so it's hard for us to get that absolute clear picture. They've indicated they'll still need to reduce costs and cut services in response to this, and we're awaiting confirmation from bus operators as to what, if any, actions will flow from that. That announcement then makes it more relevant in the context of the BSIP services that I was just talking about. And the intention is that following this Transport Committee, that the Transport Committee members will be holding a workshop in early June to work through the ramifications of these announcements and to talk through how we see the prioritisation of routes and how we can protect services going forward. The intention is to bring a report back to the 7th of July Transport Committee. Whether we'll get to the full answer on that by then remains to be seen, but we're looking to work collaboratively and quickly to work through that process. I know there's a lot there I've covered. There's probably a lot of questions as a result of that, and I'm happy together with Dave to try and answer that.
Thank you very much, Dave. So quite a lot in there. Firstly, let's start with some good news in that we've got in here the 3, can I call them Superbus? I'm not allowed to call them Superbus. It's such an easier brand name, isn't it? But anyway, 3 new services across West Yorkshire, benefiting particularly Keighley, Leeds to Shipley there, and Huddersfield to Halifax, which is great. I do have some sympathy, of course, with our Wakefield colleagues who have strongly campaigned for better bus services in Wakefield and have not been rewarded with cooperation from Arriva there in terms of improving services and not cutting them so much. So I do have some sympathy, and obviously we will work through the bus service improvement plan that we've got to try and support their ambitions in that area. But the bus announcement that's been made this week, again, it's been hand to mouth all the way through, hasn't it? So I think you're still figuring out all the ramifications of it. But it sounds like the money that the bus operators have been given is not enough, and therefore further cuts will be implemented by the operators, which is not where we want to be. We want to be in a position where we're growing the network, funding more routes, making sure fares are simpler, integrated ticketing, etc., etc. So it's particularly disappointing and frustrating. We've still got to have that workshop. Is going to be very important, isn't it, really? And it's an awful situation for us to be in, where we have to decide priorities. I mean, it's all a priority, isn't it? I'm sure we'd all find it very difficult to decide which is a priority and which is not a priority, because actually we all know that a comprehensive network leads to better patronage, better buses, and more people using those buses and getting people off the road. So the bus reform progress that was made yesterday at the Combined Authority, I think, is welcome as we look to how we can craft a future bus network which serves the people of West Yorkshire better. But I think within all that, it needs more money, doesn't it? If we need people to have a better bus service, then there needs to be some money found to support them to use them. So I open to questions, comments now. Anybody wish to say anything? Councillor Salam, Councillor Firth and Councillor Caffrey I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Dave. I think one of the things that we've got to keep in mind, I mean, I know the assessment is gone to the audit position now, and we'll wait the outcome of that. One of the things that we also got to keep in mind is that enhanced partnerships haven't worked. That's evident. They haven't worked. We've had bus services cut back. Fares were all over the place until the metal fares and came in. And I think the metal fares have actually worked. The reduced fares, £4.50 and £2, very simple fares. The only thing that hasn't worked, and I think needs some bit more work on it, is the tap on, tap off. I think that's something that needs more work on it. People are still not sure how that works, so that might be something that we need to do a bit more on to make sure that people understand and how it works, because that would actually then speed up the journey times. Whereas now people are stood there asking how it works and what can I do, and physically asking for a ticket. So that might be it. So therefore, for me, you know, whether it's an enhanced partnership or enhanced partnership plus, I don't think it's going to work. I think, you know, if we're going to go for something, it will have to be franchising. I think that's what would be cried out for. We need to put proper control as to how the networks of public transport is going to work, and for that, for me, is only one way forward. You know, I mean, we're not going to talk about the taboo subject of public ownership. That's something that we haven't talked about, or public control. But I think, you know, franchising would actually give us public control in some way. So therefore, whatever the decision is, I think, you know, we need to be mindful that I don't think the enhanced partnerships have worked.
Thank you, Councillor Slam. There's a long history of partnership working in West Yorkshire, isn't it? And you're right, we are where we are today, and that's an illustrative point of how that has not really delivered results so far. Obviously, combined authorities cannot own bus companies, so that's a legal legal barrier to what you suggest there. But I understand where you're coming from. I've got Councillor Firth, Councillor Caffrey, and Councillor Carlow.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to labour the point about enhanced partnership or about the network in West Yorkshire, but without a major partner, Arriva, coming to the table, we can't have an effective network. They've proved that by not negotiating, not working, not playing with Wakefield, and without them, we can't have an effective partnership. So can I just express my disappointment on behalf of Wakefield that the Arriva haven't come to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. Councillor Caffrey.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just about the subsidised bus fares, the £2 and things. I mean, I'm a great believer in I've always thought that buses were price sensitive, apart from reliability or anything else. Then, you know, I've thought about it myself, that they're too expensive. And I'm just sort of questioning whether this has worked in terms of numbers. In paragraph 2.19, there's lots of stats. There's, saying 7.2 million journeys, etc. People say 3.6 million, saving 20%. But the last sentence is, the data also suggests growth in patronage, which is not precise. So everything's precise apart from the growth, which I thought was crucial to having this scheme in the first place. And then it says it's 85% of pre-pandemic levels. Well, I don't know what that was in terms of numbers. I don't know what 7.2 million is, because I don't know what it's been compared to. I mean, obviously, I would hope that this is getting more people on the bus. I know it says here that, you know, let's wait 2 years and then see if it's working, but that just seems an awful lot, because this is costing nearly 1.3 million a month. So I think we ought to know, is it working in terms of numbers? Because I've just come on a bus from Halifax. There's only 1 hour now, and it was about 20 people on it. So I'm not convinced. I'd like to think it would work, because I've always thought about they're too expensive, and now I'm thinking, what's the talking rubbish? I don't know. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, the government certainly thinks it's going to work, don't they? Because they're carrying on with it from the national programme. But Dave Pearson.
Yeah, yes, I can understand the frustration in terms of putting your finger on whether or not this actually is growing patronage. I think a couple of things to think about really is, firstly, we have had quite a volatile sort of period with the pandemic. So what, you know, comparing it to before is quite difficult, because before was a lot less in terms of numbers of people using it. I think the data suggests that we were seeing sort of single-digit growth in terms of numbers of people using it, and we need to be very careful. So single-digit percentage growth. Sorry, in terms of the people using it, but we need to be really careful in terms of what we compare that to before we make judgments. I think, as Councillor Hinchcliffe said, yeah, the government's pressing on with a similar sort of principle. So I think that the general view is that by keeping bus fares cheaper and easier to understand, the long game is that actually they'll bring back passengers back. But I think it's quite difficult to actually compare it at this particular point. But I think we also are seeing different impacts in different journeys as well. So in urban areas, the savings relatively modest in terms of what people paid before, but by people making longer journeys, the savings bigger, and so that's probably going to change the pattern of people using buses as well.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Carnell.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to come back quickly, really, to Taj's point on the tap on, tap off, because it's an issue that Councillor Thompson raised on behalf of her residents. The one thing I do want to remind people is that tap on, tap off on an operator doesn't at the moment, if you're using cross operator, support the Mayor's fares. So were you to take a Transdev bus, then a First bus, then an Arriva bus, you would not find your journey capped at the £4.50. And that's the real difficulty. The tap on, tap off is just what the operators have got on their services. It doesn't work with the fares we have. So that's one of the confusions we've got at the moment. We've obviously put in these simple fares. Operators are able to offer their own fares as well. The tap on, tap off makes another confusion. Obviously we have the ambition to have a single tap on, tap off that has one system, like an Oyster card type system, but unfortunately that isn't in at the moment. So just to raise that concern if people are using two buses, because I don't want them hearing your point, and like one of Councillor Thompson's constituents paying £8, I think, for a journey they thought was going to be £4.50. So it was really on that point, but I guess overall this is getting to that point where at least we are seeing some final numbers of what bus operators will have, which is great, because I think we have been in a series of flux. Operators have not known what's coming from 3 months to the next, and that's been a real difficulty. We are unfortunately at the point where bus operators seem to be clearly saying to us that this is a lot less than they were getting previously, and they will be looking to make decisions based on that. And unfortunately, as we know of operators' decisions on that, that is to reduce the services in order to make sure that the network is affordable within their company's profit margin. So that's the one difficulty. That's why I think, just to clarify, that we've got the Superbus proposals in there, but we have also got other services in, and we're asking for some money to put towards enhancing other services as part of the approvals later. Correctly, when we've been round to districts have said, well, how can we say what services we'd like you to spend the money on now when we don't know what services are going to be offered in 2 months' time? And so that's why we're asking for that workshop then to come up and have that discussion, where we can see whatever operators might change in the coming weeks, and we can then look at where that might have impacts, take into account those impacts that have already been felt in Arriva areas in Wakefield, but unfortunately that may now be felt in other areas, and we can decide what we'll do. But the one thing I'll say, we have got that £3.8 million in here. I would be amazed if that would cover the amount of services that unfortunately we're going to be seen to be lost, because the way operators are talking is if the loss that they have is significantly more than that, and we'll wait for them to confirm, obviously, because we haven't seen sight of necessarily what they've been had, but that's just one point of caution I did want to put in there. The money is welcome to both of us and the certainty is welcome, but unfortunately it certainly isn't enough money, as you mentioned, Chair.
Not enough to cover the network we've got, regardless of wanting to grow it, so absolutely. Councillor Buckley?
Thank you, Chair. All these discussions about advanced, enhanced partnerships and such like would really be, apart from the politics of it, would be beside the point if passenger numbers were higher. You know, going back to 2019, admittedly there'd been a slow decline, but passenger numbers were at a given point. Lockdown came along and wrecked everything, including this particular industry. And given that the numbers are back to about 85% of what they were before lockdown, but they seem to be levelling off. And I've got another draft report here, which you know about. It's mentioned here that it's very much thought of that is a levelling off. Now, given that, are we officially abandoning the pre-2020, 2019 target of 10% improvement? Because that was 10% improvement on 100%. So that really should be gone. And I haven't seen it in documents recently, so I'm assuming that's quietly being buried. But that is the problem, isn't it? Secondly, the bus service improvement plan. I'm sure that Dave said when this first came along that this wasn't to be used for subsidising services which would otherwise be cut. And I just wondered whether he could tell us about that, because I get the impression now that it is going to be.
Yeah, the government told us originally we were allowed to, and then they sort of made it a bit of a grey area. I'm not sure if they've clarified since, have they?
I'll just cover that. They have, you're indeed correct, they have suggested they're relaxing that, and it can be used to support services now to some extent, and that's what we're going to be working through. I think just to come back on the other point there, the BSIP targets were to increase 15% patronage on 2019 levels, which is accepted as challenging now. I think it's fair to say, but that is the target we're committed to working towards, and the measures we're doing are seeking to improve the patronage. And there'll be factors outside our control of the BSIP itself, which may contribute towards increasing bus patronage going forward, including, there is a continued increase in return to people working and commuting as well, which you can see over time. But overall, the figures have levelled off.
So there's lots of variables, isn't there, with this as well. So if all the buses were arriving on time and the service, the passenger experience was good, then actually that would also contribute to increasing patronage. So I don't accept we're at the top of where we need to be yet. I think we could go a lot further if our services were working brilliantly. So I've got Councillor Clark, Hayden, Firth.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one on something I remember from quite a lot of previous meetings. How has the authority had a response from bus providers on the so-called ghost buses? Because it's not something I've heard on for a while.
So before you answer that, can we just go to Councillor Hayden and Councillor Firth, and then we'll come back to officers for answers. Thank you.
Thank you. It's more a comment, but I really welcome the Mayor's Fairs. I mean, it was a year ago that I was getting correspondence from residents really upset that their bus fares would go up, particularly on Arriva, without them being informed. To have that certainty, whether it does grow patronage or not, people can budget in an area where food is running at 20% inflation. They know that this week and next next year they can get on a bus and home again for £4, or two-way, or if they're getting more buses for £4.50. So I really welcome it in an age where we have so little certainty that the Mayor has put money into this and provided that certainty for people. Thank you.
Councillor Firth, and then...
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the stats about 85% that return to buses. Have we identified the missing 15%? Is it concessionary fares? Is it the elderly that are not coming back to buses? Has our officers any idea where this 15% come from, and how do we get them back?
I think it's a really good question, because it's quite a complicated sort of picture, really, because on the positive side, we're actually seeing more under-19s travelling on buses than we saw before the pandemic, and I think that's sort of testament a little bit to the policy that this committee brought in 2021 in terms of simplifying the fares for younger people, and so we're seeing a bit of growth there. The main issue really is in, firstly, in the fact that, and you can see it in this building, you can see it in other workplaces across West Yorkshire, is that people don't, particularly people who work in offices, aren't coming to work 5 days a week. So they're travelling 2 or 3 times a week, perhaps, but not 5 days a week, and that's impacting. We see that particularly in the the peak numbers, and you can see that even just looking at how quieter a bus might look on a Friday than it does on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and so that's that's really coming through in the numbers, and that comes through in terms of things like the M cards that we sell for season tickets. People are buying less season tickets because they're not travelling 5 days a week, so they're buying journeys on a more individual basis. The other area is in the concessionary bus passes, and that is sort of tracking something around about 70%, about 10% lower than the adult fare-paying passengers. And I think there's probably lots of factors involved in that in terms of people with a free bus pass, so it's no cost issues for them, just making fewer journeys, and there's probably lots of reasons for that. I'd say that's broadly sort of getting underneath the 80-ish% is probably what's happening.
Thank you, Dave. And whilst you're on your feet, ghost buses.
Yes, Ghostbusters, just for everybody else's benefit. That's where a bus appears to be on its way to a bus stop and the real-time information, and then either disappears from the screen or the information system, or just doesn't turn up. And we have had quite a few issues with people reporting that. I think that there are a number of reasons for that. We set a working group with combined authority colleagues and bus operator colleagues to work through the reasons for that, and they're still doing that. Some of that is because bus operators might have cancelled that journey whilst the bus was out on the street and the system hasn't caught up with it. So is that an issue with the bus operator reporting it, or is it an issue with the system? There are probably bits of both in that. So there's a lot of work done to minimise and reduce that happening, because obviously I think as members of this committee have said in the past, that's another example of where people might lose confidence in bus service if they think the bus is coming and it doesn't turn up. So lots of activity, lots of technical activity to try and address that.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson indicating.
Thank you, Chair. The simplicity of fares is really important. I had an interesting conversation last week with a young woman about neurodiversity and use of public transport, and feeling pushed by drivers to use tap on, tap off, which leaves them with no receipt and an uncertainty of how much they'll be paying, which was then reinforced by the other case that Councillor Carlisle referred to, and which Dave kindly helped to resolve. Of the mystery of the tap on, tap off costing somebody £8 for 4 journeys. Just the implicit, if we're wanting people to access public transport, the simpler the fare structure, the better. But if you know there's the mayor's fare, but then the bus driver tells you you've got to tap on, tap off, people don't quite know what they're doing, and it's important that we address that where we can, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Slam.
Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to actually come back very quickly. I think one of the things that we've got to actually look at, Councillor Buckley, is that if you compare the patronage from 86 to 96 to 2006 to 2016, I know we've had 2 years of, pandemic, and I think that's where we've actually stopped at 2019, and now we're looking at patronage from 2019. I'm not really sure whether the pandemic has played that much of a part, because if we look at the 2019 and 2023, I think we would have been at the same situation because of the decline in our passengers. And the pure fact is that for far too long, public transport, especially buses, have actually been neglected. It's hand-to-mouth stuff. Every 3 months, there's an announcement that we will actually give. It needs a long-term investment strategy, because what I said at the beginning was, we need people to have confidence in public transport. That bus, if I'm going to be standing in rain or at night for that bus, that it's going to turn up. That's what people need confidence in. And if they don't have that confidence, they're going to make other plans. They're going to either catch a taxi or get somebody to pick them up or use their own car. And we'll never be able to get to the point where we want, the people that we want back on buses. We'll never get them back on buses or on trains unless they are confident in the public transport. And I think that's where we are. That 15%, I'm sure, working in the industry for the last 37 years, we would have been sat here talking about that 15% if the pandemic didn't even happen, because it's been on a decline ever since.
Lovely, thank you very much, Councillor Sloan. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a sort of a quick point to kind of build on what's been said. Losing that 15%, as Councillor Salam says, it is more of a long-term trend, but I think we kind of maybe missed the trick if we're concentrating on trying to get back people who we had instead of trying to get more people who weren't on there before. Because as Dave Pearson said, some people's work and life patterns have just completely changed, and not necessarily for the worse. The abolition of the commute is not a bad thing, if at all, from an environmental point of view, or a mental health point of view, or a family life point of view. What we need to concentrate on, perhaps, instead of trying to get back those people who we're probably never going to get back, is finding out who is still driving their car persistently, and how do we get them out of it and into public transport. And of course, the solutions we've talked about endlessly are: we need cheaper and simpler fares, as we are trying to do, but we need a government that will provide us the money to run a reliable and secure service. So we're not going every 3 months saying what's going to happen, we don't know what cuts we're going to get, because ultimately that unreliability is frustrating for us, and it's just confusing for the members of the public. And speaking personally, not on behalf of the committee, and I agree with Councillor Salam again, franchising is the best we can do at the moment, I think, to push towards a better service, but public ownership or control, I know we can't do it, but that's certainly what I'd like to see ultimately.
Lovely, thank you very much, everybody, for that quite rich discussion, particularly about how far we can go with patronage. I think you're absolutely right, Councillor McLaughlin, that we need to think about new markets, and actually leisure is something that we've all talked about around this table before, isn't it? That the bus services we've got might not actually be serving the leisure market as well as they might be, and therefore having a bit more control over our bus network might enable us to grow the patronage in that respect. I think some of the concessionary fare usage going down, I think it bears looking at it a little bit further, doesn't it? Because if we've got a lot of elderly people just being on their own at home now, whereas before they were getting out and about, that's not good from a social care point of view, and I think that's probably worth looking at again. I just want to point out that in this paper, we've also approving the £6 million from BSIP, which is in item 11 as an agenda point. But it's also outlined here with which is some of the mayor's fares and the enhanced bus service scheme. So that's what we're going to move to recommendation on now, noting the BSIP programme update and approving that funding approval request. So anybody else anything to say before we move to that recommendation? Dave, did you want to come in briefly then, as it's... I could see you itching.
All I was going to say was that Transport Focus are doing some interesting research, which we should be able to come back to the next meeting, on why older people with free bus passes aren't travelling, and I think it'd be quite useful to bring that back and to reflect on how that works in West Yorkshire.
Thank you, that was good value for money there. Thank you very much, Dave. So let's have a look at that report and consider it bringing back to the next Transport Committee meeting. Thank you very much. So with that then, I'm happy to recommend the recommendations we've got in the report. Councillor Carroll can second that, and all those in favour please show. Thank you very much, that is carried. Thank you. So now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is passenger experience update. And it's a bit an uninspiring title, but there's actually quite a lot in this report to discuss. Including Transpennine Express and the fact that DfT has determined the operation of TPE should now transfer to the government-owned operator of last resort alongside Northern and LNER. So I think, Dave Pearson, you're speaking to this item.
I am, and I won't go over the detail of the report. This is the report we bring to you, which is basically an update as to what's happening out on the public transport network since the last meeting. So we've had a long discussion around punctuality, reliability, and patronage in the previous item. Just to pull one or two things out, because this report deals with rail issues as well as bus issues. Clearly, the rail service is still impacted by industrial action. It's also had the specific issues that TransPennine Express have been experiencing. We've discussed at these meetings previously, and in 3.34, the decision regarding the sort of termination of the TransPennine Express franchise and bringing it back into the operator of last resort provision that government have. Clearly, the performance figures aren't showing any impact of that yet, and that's probably something that will need to work through in time. I think the other thing the report points out in terms of bus, which I think we've covered in the last item, is we still, I think Councillor Carlisle has pointed this out, we're still in a position where there could be further reductions and services that come out of the funding announcement. So still a little bit of choppy waters really in terms of rail and bus going sort of moving forward. Lots of detail in the report, so happy to answer any specific questions.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Firth?
I'd just like to mention the still abysmal service for TPE. When I made making this Wednesday, and I thought, I'm going to train. So I turned up for the 11:27, only to find, guess, cancelled again. So I jumped in the car and I made it. So rail travel to me just is almost like the last resort. Because you can't, David's mentioned it, you can't depend on them anymore. And that's why patronage is still not climbing as it used to. Every time I go see the notice, Huddersfield Station coming back, cancelled. And it will be the same throughout West Yorkshire. When are they going to get the act together? I know it's going to be transferred or is being transferred to public ownership, but it's the same people running it and the same drivers and it's the same timetable and the same cancellations. Sorry to have a little moan, but it's a fact of life, I'm afraid. And until that's resolved, we're going nowhere. That's a pun.
Thank you, Councillor Firth, and of course for any regular passengers on TPE, and Councillor Korshik is making this point many a times, it is deeply frustrating that they cannot rely properly on a service which is so vital. It's the only route we've got really across Pennines, and we cannot tolerate that. Hopeful that obviously with change of operating model, then it might lead to better relationships with trade union colleagues so that we can get to better accommodation there, and then we might get to see some improvement. So I'm an optimist and hoping that that will actually bear fruit. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay. Lovely. Well, in that case, we note the report. And I think there's no approvals required on that report. So we go now on to review of MyBus primary school services. Now, it's important to note, I think, that we've been sustaining these services as a combined authority for some years without government support. Government used to fund these services, but stopped doing so several years ago now. Given all the financial conversations we've been having throughout this meeting, you will understand that it is difficult for us to continue funding this without government support, particularly when you look at the table, I think, which was in here, which showed that, was it one service that was £23 per passenger or something, which is obviously very steep. There's been a consultation. Dave, do you want to update us on that?
Yes. Back in 2019, the committee approved a set of guidelines and what bus services, school bus services that the combined authority would provide, and set a value for money sort of measure, which has been updated in light of recent sort of economic changes. And so what this report's doing is saying we're actually applying that value for money assessment to a number of services. That value for money is applied all the time as each school bus service is sort of reviewed, particularly around the change in the academic year. We do look very closely. Most of the secondary school services are pretty full, and we try and optimise the service provision. But we do run some specific services to primary schools, which were, as Councillor Hinchliffe said, originally funded by government, and we've sustained those services, and now given the increase in costs of provision across the piece, we need to look fairly carefully at which of them are still offering value for money. So the 39 of these services, of which 17 weren't sort of meeting the £2 target. So what happened early in the year, and I think we notified members of the committee at the time, was we started a public engagement process on whether or not those services were actually needed and valued by the schools, by the communities, by the users, and what options might be available. And this report really sets out what the outcome of that was in terms of the engagement, in terms of the actions to be taken. So in paragraphs 2.6 and 2.7, it sets out the services where the analysis and the engagement and the sort of interaction with the school would suggest that those services should be withdrawn from the end of the academic year. And in 2.8, those are services where some continued action to maintain journeys and to sort of address the sort of funding gap in some of them, particularly with the school and with the sort of funding partners in terms of denominational schools. So the report sets out basically a bit of a process to apply the guidelines which you approved in 2019, and is there for your sort of information in terms of how that's been done. And I'm happy to take any questions around that.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions, comments? Councillor Catherine. Yes, you may. You may, if you obviously. Fine. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite disappointing to see the number of services obviously cut from this one, and as I should say, it's as one of the ward members affected by these cuts, I would like to say it's very disappointing to see this lowering. And I hope that the committee will be able to review that decision and obviously change its policy if funding is permitted.
I think it's just the lack of funding that we've got as an authority. I have every sympathy, Councillor Clark, but it is just, we don't have the money, do we, Dave?
No, and I think we were probably, in some of these cases, we're applying quite an expensive solution to a fairly not very well used sort of problem, if like, in terms of the levels of use of these services were quite low, and that's why the cost per passenger was quite high. What we have sought to do is to adapt other services where we can to maintain the journeys for those people who are particularly adversely affected. But a lot of, as we know, a lot of primary schools are by their nature within sort of relatively easy walking distance of the catchment areas that they serve, and that in some of these cases the children using the services were within a mile of the school. In other cases we were able to adapt to the services to meet them. So we're trying to make the best of it. If as Councillor Hinchliffe said, if we had unlimited resources, then it might justify putting effectively a bus that carries 30, 40, 50 people to carry sort of 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s, and that's sort of what's been done with these services in the past.
Thank you very much. Any Councillor Clark, do you want to briefly come back?
And again, I completely understand the scarce resources, but I think the committee might need to take a more pragmatic approach. There's certainly wards such as mine that's very rural, and it's very, very easy to apply a uniform policy and say that's fair, they think. But I think in terms of incredibly rural areas, I think a more pragmatic approach might need to be taken. But again, that's just my view.
Did you have anything back from about the Steeton issue and the consultation? Do you remember?
Steeton.
Because that's the ward that Councillor Clark is referring to.
Yes, is that the P31? Yeah, I can get back to Councillor Clark.
P23.
P23. Right, that one. I can come back to you on the detail of that. I'm happy to give you a background. My colleague can probably make contact with you, as she has done with quite a few councillors. We have actually worked quite closely with ward councillors and with the schools to sort of identify the issues that come from that. So I'll ask her to to give you a ring and make contact and talk through the issues as they emerge from that one. I think generally that there are one or two of these situations in 2.8 where there has been some recognition of the fact that whilst in some of these areas there are other bus services in the vicinity that could be used or within walking distance, there's a few examples in 2.8 of where there aren't, and where rural areas and rural disbursement of population has been taken into consideration.
Thank you very much. Any more comments or questions on this item? No. In that case, the recommendation is we note the actions being taken. Can I just see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. So moving now to the final item, but this is also project approvals. We're going to have, there's a few people actually going to speak on this, depending on which item we've got first. So first one is Rachel, I believe. So about the bus network, bus service improvement plan.
I'll actually pick that one up.
Oh, right.
This flows really from the report that I introduced around the bus service improvement plans. I won't go over the detail again, but in effect, this approval is seeking to.
We've already done this.
Yeah, so it's just confirmed we're drawing down the money on this. So are you happy with that? Are we approved?
We've got our hands up.
That's all good.
So are we all right with that? Because we did do that.
If the committee agrees, I would.
Just checking I'm legal on that.
I think
We put our hands up for that as part of the other item.
Yeah, that's fine.
So moving on then, David Gill, Combined Services and Assets Database.
Oh, shall I give my summary? Okay. So, this scheme is regarding the procurement implementation of a replacement system for the Combined Services and Assets IT system, which is approaching 25 years old. The system will provide public transport information and support management of the public transport network, which is a statutory obligation for the Combined Authority. The new system will enable the CA to continue to create and manage bus timetables, manage and plan public transport, provide journey planning tools for the public, and provide scheduling of taxi transport for young people with special educational needs. It will enable access to education and training via this system. In terms of the impact, it will enable the CA to continue to meet its statutory obligations. It will put the organisation in a good position to improve and meet future transport needs with a modern transport system which is flexible and will enable the organisation to deliver its future plans. For example, this scheme supports the transition to future bus franchising by replacing a single outdated system with various interactive solutions which are more suitable for the future. The systems which this system COSA will replace will meet the authority's technology standards. This means that they'll be cloud hosted, secure, accessible from remote locations, mobile device compatible, and have appropriate supplier support arrangements in place. We're seeking to put in place systems which enable efficient processes and will allow the organisation to make a step change in utilising digitised technologies to have a more modern back office system which can provide better services. These new set of systems will place a high degree of importance on value for money, accessibility for our diverse staff force, and intelligent reporting. The total scheme cost is $615,000 and it's going to be funded by the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. And we're seeking approval to go through decision point 2 to 4, and the funding recommendation is $615,000, of which £50,000 has previously been provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So will this make it the information on the bus stops more accurate?
That is the real-time system, which the COSA system integrates with, so it won't provide any different source data for the real-time system. The real-time system is a separate system to the COSA system.
Thank you very much. This obviously is a new system to make things work at the back office that doesn't really seem to have an awful lot of obvious public benefit, although it is in the cloud, and I'm told the cloud is a wonderful place for IT to be these days.
Just to build on what David's saying, I mean, what happens to the system is that all the bus timetables are put into a database, and that database then feeds the real-time information system. It creates the paper timetable that goes on the bus stop, that sort of thing. It's an existing system that needs to be replaced and updated so that we and hopefully can improve the accuracy of that system. So every bit of public bus service information flows through this system and then out into the various different ways in which the customer sort of experiences it. So a new system should actually make that process slicker, but it should also improve sort of the accuracy of the information.
Okay, so it's like having a car and you're replacing the engine but not giving it a respray kind of thing. It's the engine, isn't it? Engines are important. Any more questions or comments on this bit? No? Well, in that case, can I see all those in favour of this particular item approval, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you. Next one is Vicky Dumbrell talking about Leeds City Bikes, Leeds.
Okay, thank you. So this is the full and final approval for the Leeds City Bikes scheme. It was given an approval at the early stage of development by the Combined Authority, and the approval route that was agreed then was that the project would come back for consideration at full business case rather than outline. It's funded through the pot of funding that's ring-fenced for the additional carbon mitigation measures within Transforming Cities Fund. All the parameters that were forecast and that were presented during the early stages, they have now been met. So around the funding from the Combined Authority, the number of bikes, the timescales and that kind of thing. All the bikes in the fleet will be electric, which makes them much more viable for more journeys and for a lot more people, particularly if they haven't cycled for a long time or if they're new to using a bike. There'll be over 650 bikes available and 140 docking stations around the city centre, and also 10 electric tricycles. So a full equalities assessment has been undertaken, and the trikes are a pilot offer that's been provided by the operator. A thorough assessment of the carbon impacts has been done, and that shows that even when taken into account the carbon from producing the bikes, there is a net reduction in carbon. There's an experienced operator who's on board now, a dedicated scheme manager in post and working through all the operational aspects, so identifying the docking station sites around the city centre, working through the approvals and the permissions, so all of that is really ramping up now towards the initial launch at the end of the summer. So full fleet will be in place by the end of March next year, and part of the arrangement with the operator is that 25% of any profits do go back to Leeds. This is to be ring-fenced though, and it will be ploughed back into the scheme to make sure that it is continue to be a success. All of the equipment will be owned by Leeds, and at the end of the contract, with the operator. It's not without its risks, and these are set out in the report. So there is a commitment from the operator and from Leeds to ensure that any shortfalls in revenue are covered. The operator is very experienced. They're running a number of schemes around the country now, so they bring all of their learning around dealing with risks around vandalism and theft into this scheme. And an order has been placed for a portion of the bikes now, and Leeds has a lot of the safe cycle infrastructure on the road, so there is a lot of confidence that despite the risks it will be a success. So the request today is for a full approval of the scheme. The operator is providing match funding of around 860,000. So the recommendation for today is for full approval of 1.7 million combined authority funds. So including the 300,000 that has already been approved, that gives a total funding from the CA of 2 million.
Thank you very much. It certainly sounds a very good idea. Is it a model that we can therefore roll out into other districts?
Yeah, really keen to do that, and we've got agreements in place with Leeds and with the operator that we will learn lessons, things around the procurement and how it's being rolled out. All of that will absolutely be taken forward into how this can be brought further into other districts. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Islam,
Chair, as an active travel champion for Bradford, I think that was the question that I was going to ask. Is it possible? But that's been answered. I mean, myself and Martin have actually tried and trialed the bikes, the electric bikes. We've taken them for a ride and we found, other than some of the obstacles, I think they were very, very good to actually use. And I think one of the questions that I was going to ask is that, I've been asking for combined authority to have a pool of bikes for officers or elected members to actually use backward and forward to other districts. So if I want to come from Bradford, I should be able to go to Bradford City Hall, get a bike from there, and then come and dock it here, or take it back if I need to, go back on the bike. I think that would actually be, a good incentive for us to actually get some of our own out of the cars and put them on bikes. Just as Keith had to go to the train and it was cancelled, so he had to jump in his car. If he was to be able to go to, Wakefield City Hall and get a bike from there and ride it here, it would have saved the car journey and the pollution that is actually caused. So therefore, is that something that we could consider going forward, Chair? And, these kind of schemes, because these people that are going to be providing the bikes and so could actually be receptive to this kind of request.
Thank you. So there's a question there about also all districts and also whether we, as pioneers of transport, should actually be showing the way between authorities. Our other champion cyclist is Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. Echo a lot of what Taj has said, particularly with the rollout. In the cover report, it talks about Leeds city centre and surrounding areas. That one? Hello. Because when we start with the Brabin bikes or Tracy trikes or whatever the tag is, you can use it. The key thing is, as Taj has said, how far out of the city centre can you use them to commute in, which will help. And again, a point well made by Taj, particularly when we're talking about trikes, is there are still physical barriers on the network. And if officers want, I've still got a picture of Taj and I when we went out, when he had to lift a bike over a barrier, which was fortunate he was able to do, but obviously we're looking for people who may not be as physically able. So we need to have a look at that. I'm slightly concerned about the practicalities that the batteries have got to be taken out and charged somewhere else. How will users know if these are a docking station, the level of battery cover that you've got? Because the worst thing you could have in the terrain that we've got around here is somebody takes a bike out and finds the battery goes flat on the journey. So the practicalities, I think, are another thing that we need to look at. And again, a key question echoing what's been said is, how soon will a decision be made either to roll out to other authorities or to extend it? Because, again, coming from our areas, you could have park and ride at Tingley, Gildersome and places like that coming from Kirklees, where people can then get on an e-bike and come into Leeds and further reduce the carbon for the areas. So it's an exciting scheme, but we need to really be seeing it extended much further.
Councillor Hayden?
I can answer a couple of those questions, if that's all right. So, first of all, it's going out quite far out of Leeds City Centre, actually. So we're looking at Meanwood. The Shaftesbury Junction near where I am is the nearest in East Leeds. So that kind of circle and then going around Westleigh. So it's not just the city centre. It's not what I consider Leeds city centre anyway.
Is it going towards civilisation though?
It is.
Towards
yeah.
Kirklees?
No, we don't go that far. No, in terms of Leeds, it's not going to the outer area. So
No.
if you look at kind of like you know, going out as far as the A60. Yeah, kind of that area, which is not Leeds city centre. It's, to my mind, the Shaftesbury is about 3 miles, you know, it's no longer there anymore, it's now a nursing home, but it's the Shaftesbury pub, I mean. But if you go out there, it's a good 2.5, 3 miles, and Meanwood as well. So if we're looking at that circle around Leeds, it's quite far out of the Leeds city centre. I would like to see it rolled out further into Leeds. I'd love to see docking stations in, you know, at Crossgates train station areas, you know, those sort of areas. I know I'm being very parochial here, but, you know, it's... but I can't accuse Councillor Bolt of that ever. So, in terms of the batteries and the battery life, that will all be on the app about how you know, what the kind of level of battery is. The operator is very experienced and very excited to come to Leeds. And we've got a lot of confidence in the operator, and I'm really pleased that we're having docking stations. I don't like it when I go to London and bikes are strewn here, there, or anywhere. These bikes will have to go into a docking station. They will be neat. They will be contained in an area so that they're not proving. It will include trikes. So, yeah, we can call them Tracy. And by the way, I came up with Braben bikes before. And, yeah, Tracy trikes. And so it will involve, there are accessibility areas outside of, and I'm thinking, you know, outside of kind of Leeds City Centre, and as you get further, so they will have to be addressed as it's rolled out. There was another thing. What? Something. Pardon? I would love to see it. I'm really excited about this. I know that there's a lot of my colleagues in Leeds that are really excited. I want to say thank you to the active travel officers in the Highways Department in Leeds who worked really, one of whom has gone to Active Travel England. I'm not holding her against. I'm not holding it against you, Lindsay. But they worked really, really hard on getting this scheme and getting it to fruition. We're hoping in the next, especially with the students coming back. You know, it's great to see so many people travelling on bike through Leeds City Centre as it is. I never thought, growing up in Leeds and even in my 20s and 30s, I'd ever see anybody on a bike in Leeds. So, you know, it's fantastic to see it anyway. So this is really welcome. Thank you.
Do you go on a bike?
Thank you. Councillor
I
Buckley.
don't.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. So it's not going to All Woodley then?
No, we're not going out to your neck of the woods.
My question is about where they're going to be allowed to go. Are these things going to be allowed on pavement or in pedestrianised areas?
So I'll bring Councillor Carlisle because he seems to have an immediate answer to that question, and then I'll go back to the officer. Thank you.
They're allowed where a bike goes because they're a bike, Councillor Buckley. So they're allowed on the cycleway or in the highway. They are allowed where a bike is. You then park them on the dock. They're allowed. If you had, I imagine an under 12 isn't allowed to ride one of these because they would be a full-size bike. Under 12s are the only people that can ride on the pavement legally. They're a bike. They're allowed in any place a bike is normally allowed to go. I don't know if I can make that much clearer. And some of the first span is to have them within, you know, a couple of miles radius of the Leeds City Centre docks. And that's the kind of journey we could expect the majority of people to replace. I think the next one is looking at other hubs, like my own New Pudsey train station could have a dock there that would take you 2 miles out of that. We wouldn't necessarily expect immediately everyone to start cycling 8 miles on one of these as the first thing they do. But a mile between Chapeltown and Leeds would be very easy to do, especially so considering there's the infrastructure there. But yeah, they are only allowed where a bike normally is at the moment. So somebody wouldn't be expected to ride a bike on a footway at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Carl seems to be using common sense and the law, which is frustrating, I know. But Councillor Buckley.
Cyclists occasionally don't, do they? But not very often, but sometimes.
Present company accepted.
This thing about pedestrianised areas, it's a serious question because on a busy day full of pedestrians and old age pensioners, are we going to get incidents potentially where they could be knocked down?
I think what they're saying is actually that happens now, whether or not this, isn't it? So it's a wider question about cycle use and pavement use, isn't it, really? And I think we've all probably got instances in our own districts where, you know, electric scooters and all this kind of thing suddenly come out of nowhere. So I think it's a wider question that I don't think is relevant to this item, is it really? But it is a wider issue that we're all coming across now in our wards. Councillor Firth, and then I'm going to go back to the officer.
It is that very point I've been trying to get in for some time. I've read the papers, and if somebody does get flattened by electric bike on a trike, who's liable? Who owns them? Who's insured them? If you flatten somebody when you're on your trike, Councillor Buckley, who's liable?
We'll ask that question of the officer. Councillor Hayden.
Just coming back to a point that Councillor Bolt, when he asked me, do I go on a bike? No, I don't. Actually, I can ride a bike, principally for safety reasons. And I'm really hoping that this scheme will encourage people like me to actually trial electric bikes or and give them that confidence, because I haven't got that confidence at the moment to ride a bike in, you know, from my journey from home to Leeds City Centre, which is about 5 miles. I've got the superhighway that goes to Bradford, but very near my home, but then it's not completely yet connected up in Leeds. So if I'm going to the Civic Hall, I will have to go on highway that is not, I don't feel safe and confident at the moment. So I'm hoping that this will give me the confidence I need to start riding, start cycling, and people like me will replace more journeys that would have been done with more carbon emitting vehicles. So yeah, that's another reason I'm really excited, because I'd love to cycle, have that confidence to cycle more often.
Lovely. So I'm going to go to the officer, but Councillor Salam wants to say something very, very short.
Just to keep in mind, Chair, it'll be 600 people riding a bike. That's 600 journeys, you know what I mean? Yeah. But that's just if they just made a single trip. And I don't assume that people are going to just make a single trip. So, you know, it could multiply over so many times. So I think it's a non-brainer, you know what I mean, not to have these. Like you say, London, or you go Europe, people are actually riding around on bikes and scooters all over the place, all over the place.
Thank you. So, would you like to come back on some of those questions then?
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to what's already been said, so the operator is very experienced, so they have dealt with a lot of these issues in other parts of the country. Some of what they do is around kind of training and kind of rewards through the app and that sort of thing. So they are able to use a bit of a kind of a carrot and stick approach to encourage people to use the bikes and to, you know, make use of them safely. So they do bring that experience. The other thing to add is that the part of the feedback we've had from the operator is that the safe cycle routes that have been constructed in Leeds, that what they see from other parts of the country is the data, and that's going to be a really important part of monitoring and evaluating the scheme and its success, is that a lot of the journeys are on the segregated cycle routes, and that's where, you know, people are feeling more confident and comfortable to ride. So the monitoring and evaluation, as I say, there is a plan that has been developed around that, and that is going to be a really important part of the scheme, and that learning the lessons and how it can be rolled out to other districts, and where you know, improvements need to be made, and making sure that it is a success. So that is a key part of it too.
Councillor Buck, you want to come out briefly, please?
Thanks. Could I just ask officers if City Connect still offers cycle training for people like Councillor Hayden and others, so that as we're rolling this out, if people have that issue, if we still have that within City Connect, I've just looked, it's still on the website that we can do sort of one-to-one cycle training and give people the confidence. We need to be putting that alongside the capital investment.
Councillor Cowell, do you know to that?
Yes, we do. But as well as that, Leeds has brought in some of its own, and it's got its own staff that are now running a lot more based on this scheme coming in as well. So there'll be an addition of that in Leeds as well as what the City Connect team already do.
Councillor Firth? Oh yes, insurance. Did you pick that up? If they have an accident, is it whose fault is it?
In terms of that question, I think I'd need to just check that rather than giving out information that's not correct, and just come back to you on that point after the meeting, if that's okay.
So we'll get that question answered, Councillor Firth. But as I think the officer said, that we it sounds like it's an experienced operator who will have come across these incidents before, so that there'll be a clear and legal answer ready for that, I'm sure. But I think on the whole, I've heard very positive comments around this scheme. I think we've asked lots of questions because we're all interested in it in our own area, for example. So that's why it's listed so many questions today. I'm happy to recommend that for approval. Can I see those people in favour, please show? Yeah, that's carried. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing how that works, Councillor Hayden. So next one is bus service improvement again, clear and simple fares, mayor's fares.
I'll pick this up very briefly on the assumption that I don't think we raised our hands this before, but we did cover all the territory around this one before. In simple terms, it's drawing down, requesting a further £11.278590 pounds to continue to fund the mayor's fare during the period through to the end of March 2024. And obviously it'll be subject to any decisions we make downstream around where we go to with mayor's fares.
So notwithstanding obviously government programmes, etc., we need to make sure we keep things going for members of the public whilst we consider that. So I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you, that is carried. Next item then is Thorpe Park Rail Station, and we have Alexander Carpenter and Peter Coelho.
Yes, I'm going to present today. Hello everybody, I'm Alex Carpenter from the Combined Authority. I'm here to present Thorpe Park Rail Station, a scheme which will deliver a new rail halt on the Leeds to York section of the Transpennine Railway, located immediately southwest of the junction between Manston Lane and the newly constructed East Leeds orbital route. The station's general form and level of provision has been guided by passenger demand and will comprise the following: 2 platforms with 4 railway tracks to accommodate the Transpennine route upgrade, capable of accommodating 6-car trains connected with a covered footbridge, a station building with waiting areas, ticketing facilities, information points and staff facilities, cycle facilities and bus drop-off points, and ground level car parking with circa 500 spaces and electrical vehicle charging points. The scheme aims to attract new users to the rail market, improving access to labour markets for employers, reducing congestion and improving air quality on Leeds arterial roads. It will support housing growth in the area, in particular the East Leeds extension, which is due to deliver up to 5,000 new homes by providing access to employment and leisure opportunities in the West Yorkshire urban centres. And it will improve access to the strategic long-distance rail market for residents and businesses in the east of Leeds city region. The scheme cost is currently £31.64 million and is funded through a combination of West Yorkshire Transport Fund, LIPTIP and New Stations Fund, and there's also potential for developer contributions. Including the wider economic benefits, the benefit cost ratio for the scheme at OBC was 1.87, which represents a medium value for money. The scheme has obtained OBC approval and has since secured GRIP 3, which is a Governance for Rail Investment Projects approval. The request today is for the release of £7 million of New Stations Fund to progress the scheme forward into GRIP Phase 4 and 5, with a programmed entry into service of December 2025. The snapshot of the top 3 primary risks for the scheme are that the funding strategy is still to be confirmed, with discussions ongoing between the Combined Authority, Network Rail and a private developer. There is a risk that the funding gap could further increase if the release of the New Stations Fund is not approved due to the March 2024 committed spend deadline, and there is a risk that planning consent and other required approvals are not given, which could impact the programme. So the decision I'm looking to seek today is the approval of the change request, which is to increase the combined authority's contribution to 20.9 million, an increase of £7 million. The release of the additional New Stations Fund development funding of £7 million to continue to progress the scheme and carry out early works, and to request the delivery timescale to decision point 5 is extended to the 30th of July 2025. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The funding is all public sector funding. There's a lot of industry and new development, particularly coming on through ELAW and things like that. Is there any Section 106, or I think it leads itself funding? Excuse me. Is there any developer contribution that's going to come into this?
I thought there was in here. Am I wrong? I've got the wrong section.
No, I think that has been queried. I'm a new project manager, so I'll have to double check, but it is something that has been queried, and I think it was rejected by the council, but I have to double check on that one, and I can come back to you with a more succinct answer.
Perhaps thinking of White Rose Stations quite a lot.
I'll just come in briefly on that one. I mean, the work is ongoing in terms of discussions with the developer around that. In terms of capturing contributions to East of Leeds, ELAW obviously has already captured a number of contributions as relating to future housing development in the area, which will be funding the ELAW that's already gone in. There are discussions ongoing, you're right, locally around where more development takes place and whether there's scope to capture those monies.
So it's ongoing, I think, is the answer to that, Councillor Bolt. Any other questions, comments on this? No? In that case, I'm happy to recommend approval. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you, that is carried. So the final one is Halifax Bus Station, and that is going to be Mark Auger.
Is that it? Yeah, thank you. Yep, my name's Mark Auger. I'm here to present the change report on Halifax Bus Station for a project that's well underway. It started on site in September 2021. It's due to be complete in October this year, but we have a partial opening in July where we open the new passenger concourse and half of the bus stands. So I'll talk a bit about the objectives and then get on to the detail of what's changed. It was an old bus station, over 30 years old, on a slope, with all sorts of potential safety issues of buses and passengers mixing and difficulties for people on their own at night in remote shelters, things going on there. So we had objectives to make it safer, to separate pedestrians from bus movements, to make it more secure, have everybody in a single concourse, we can self-police, everybody can see everybody else, accessible, rather than passengers going up and down the slope, and we've turned the concourse 90 degrees, they go level. So much more accessible. Reduce carbon with solar heat pumps. The green roof will help, and will help with biodiversity as well, and also increasing bus use, of course, is good for carbon reduction. And create more income, there's space for a cafe and an office space that we can rent out. But it's a complex site, busy town centre site, which is on the same site as an existing bus station. And the first thing we had to do was move 2/3 of the buses, 2/3 of the passengers into the town centre to existing stops. And that's a challenging thing to do, but that left 1/3 on site. So we had to build a temporary bus station at the bottom of the site to cope with that. So we've built a 6-stand bus station that's been operating for over a year as part of this project. There's other constraints on site. There's 3 listed buildings that we're tapping into, which we had some knowledge of, but we have found in doing the work on those buildings that there's been more to do. More issues have arisen as we've gone along. We've found things in the ground. Busy town centre site has been used over many years for many things. We found asbestos, we found human remains. We've had to deal with that. Stood out there with CSI one day pointing at the bones. It was an interesting day. They were over 300-year-old, so we don't need to worry. And they will be reburied with due respect. Utilities, they're a challenge, working with BT and Virgin, moving their stuff particularly when you're in a pandemic and they're prioritising other things. npower delayed works and cost us money, but they were busy doing other important work at the time. So some challenges have come along. Early on, some of you will have seen the big hole we had to put in for attenuation. It was planned, but to slow the water up, bigger than an Olympic swimming pool. We had to dig down 6 metres to rock. So this is why we find things in the ground. Those timescales I gave you indicate that we started work in a pandemic. We started work in lockdown. So I've been on this 5 years now, and this has been designed in the bedrooms of many people across West Yorkshire. Quite a challenge. One of the main issues came up, this caused us more time and money, was there are more minibuses in use now. We'd designed some of the stands to accommodate minibuses and even the small transits that are used around Calderdale for the more remote services. But now we've had to design for all bus stands to be able to accommodate these minibuses, which was quite a big change. And inflation. At the start of the project, the contractor will have priced in some inflation. Not necessarily all of what's happened, but some of that was their risk. But when things change and we make new requests, such as please redesign for minibuses, the prices are quite high. Inflation has really pushed up the cost of construction. So certainly whenever there's something new, certainly if it's something we've asked for, it costs more money. We have been able to mitigate some of the things as we've gone along. For instance, Virgin were due to come and move their fibre, they didn't come, but we were able to help with Dave, who's gone over our IT people, to put in a router, a hotspot, some stuff I don't understand. That meant we could do cash transactions without the fibre link for a while. Not great, but we did it. We put SIM cards in the ticket vending machine so they could work without the connections. When we found the asbestos, the contractor was able, that was reasonably early in the programme, was able to reprogram and effectively no cost. So that was good. And there are other projects going on in Halifax, and the contractor has been able to put some ducting across some entrances to help with city fibre that are coming. And we are in discussions with the A629 project and have done a few early bits with them, relamping of lights and things. So we've been able to mitigate a lot of it, but not all of it. And this change report requests an additional 2.8 million and an additional 3 months to get us to the end of the project. A good chunk of that is for things that have already happened, because we're well into this project, but another big chunk of it is to ensure we're covered for any more risks that come out as we go along. We are still working on the listed buildings. We are still digging in the ground. We're still working with difficult levels on a sloping site that are difficult to work with. Even with that extra cost, we still have a benefit cost ratio of 2.1, which is high. So it still has high value for money, even with these additional costs. I think I've covered everything I wanted to there. So yeah, that's it. That's our recommendation. Give us some more money and we'll get on to the end.
Thank you very much, and it has been my pleasure in previous years to actually come visit the site myself when you earlier on in the construction, of course, and I saw the massive attenuation tank you got there, and obviously the plans look great. And I have to say, Combined Authority officers are very passionate about Halifax and that project, and it was great to see the ownership that officers had of that project. So, anybody, any questions, comments? Councillor Salam.
Just an observation and a question. I mean, one of the worst bus stations that I've ever driven in, there were more scrapes and collisions because you had to go in and then we're out. So the back of the bus always actually struck the platform. So the sloping of the bus station, I don't know, whoever took the decision to build it on there, I'm not really sure how it got passed. Are they going to be, I mean, currently the temporary station that we've got, I mean, there's, drive in, reverse off. Is there any reversing off policy in there?
Yes.
So there will be some stands that...
All of them.
All of them?
Yeah.
All right, so like Huddersfield?
Yeah, it's a long concourse, it's double-sided, and the buses come into the concourse. So like Leeds, like Bradford. Yes, all drive in, reverse out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Good. Anybody, any further questions? No? In that case, I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? That is carried. Thank you very much. I think the only other thing to note on the agenda is that there's decisions being made at the Combined Authority the 16th of March, which are in your papers, which couldn't quite wait until this meeting, so those are noted there. But otherwise, I think we've done everything on our agenda. So thank you very much for your attendance, everybody, today, and see you at, well, can I say, before we go, this is the last meeting that Dave Pearson is going to attend. Transport Committee. So, Dave, we just wanted to say thank you we've done a card. We wanted to say thank you very much indeed for all your help and wise words of wisdom. Even today you've provided information that nobody else knew, so I'm not quite sure how we're going to manage without you. But you have been brilliant and your knowledge is massive and we've all been beneficiaries of that over the years. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Slam, did you?
Just wanted to ask you, good luck in your retirement, Dave, and all the best. You're not being investigated for the human remains at Halifax bus station.
Are you suggesting I know where all the bodies are buried?
On that note, I think we'll close the meeting. But
anyway,
obviously we'll have our own meeting. You mentioned your own good wishes as you exit the meeting today.